Hey everybody, what's up? What's going on? This is Storm. You're watching Roaming, your podcast on dance culture. Coming from a deeply rooted hip-hop background, I grew up with what I would describe or what I would call a battle mentality. The battle mentality extends beyond the battle itself. It is a way of approaching problems, opportunities, and relationships that develops through sustained participation in competitive environments. Over time, I, and also many other dancers, of course, learn to rely on their own judgment, develop independent solutions, questioned established approaches, and distinguish themselves from others. Because recognition emerges through distinction. The battle mentality directs attention toward differences, weaknesses, and opportunities to actually contribute something unique. It encourages self-reliance, skepticism, experimentation, and the continued refinement of one's own approach. These qualities have contributed significantly to the development of our dance culture, sure. They help explain its remarkable capacity for individual expression and the extraordinary level of technical complexity that has emerged over time. At the same time, that battle mentality that contributes to artistic development can create grave friction when the task involves cooperation rather than comparison. Or even more directly, at the same time, a mentality that encourages people to develop their own solutions, defend their own positions, and distinguish themselves from others does not automatically prepare them for the compromises and coordination that collective projects require. Community development often requires individuals to direct attention towards shared interests rather than differences, alignment rather than distinction, and collective objectives rather than individual solutions. The challenge, therefore, does not arise from the battle mentality itself, but from the transition between two different modes of engagement, each serving a different purpose within the culture. The influence of the battle mentality may also help explain hip-hop's historically complex relationship with institutions. We all know that for much of its history, hip-hop developed outside established cultural, educational, and political structures. Progress often depended upon self-organization, experimentation, and the ability to create opportunities independently. These conditions rewarded many of the same qualities cultivated through battles, which are skepticism towards authority, reliance on personal judgment, non-conformity, and certainly a willingness to challenge established practices. The same qualities also reinforce one of hip-hop's most enduring principles: show and prove. Here, claims were expected to be demonstrated rather than merely stated. Respect emerged through action, contribution, and performance rather than through some titles, credentials, or formal status. It created an environment in which ideas, skills, and reputations remained subject to continual empirical testing. Authority derived primarily from demonstrated competence rather than institutional position. Viewed from this perspective, hip-hop's anti-establishment tendencies become a lot easier to understand, right? Dancers learn to trust what could be observed, experienced, and demonstrated. They develop confidence in their own ability to solve problems, create opportunities, and navigate challenges without relying upon external structures. These qualities contributed significantly to the culture's resilience and capacity for innovation. At the same time, the qualities that help people operate outside institutions do not necessarily help them build institutions. The principle of show and prove directs attention towards individual contribution. What can you do? What can you demonstrate? What can you contribute? But institution building introduces a different set of questions. What can we build together? Which shared objectives deserve support? Which structures enable long-term development? Addressing these questions requires more than individual competence. It requires trust, persuasion, cooperation, and a willingness to support initiatives whose benefits extend beyond the individual contributor. This may help explain a recurring paradox within hip-hop. Many practitioners recognize the need for stronger educational structures, better representation, sustainable organizations, and greater coordination. Yet, the same culture that produces these aspirations also cultivates habits that favor independence over alignment and individual solutions over collective ones. The challenge, therefore, is not a conflict between individuality and cooperation. It is learning how to preserve the strengths that emerge from show and prove, while developing the capacities required to build and sustain institutions of our own. In this sense, I believe awareness building becomes increasingly important. People rarely support objectives they do not understand, and they rarely coordinate around challenges they do not recognize. Before a culture can mobilize around a common goal, it must first develop a common understanding of why that goal matters. Awareness building, therefore, precedes coalition building. It helps individuals recognize shared interests, common challenges, and opportunities for collective development. Coalition building then only begins when that understanding translates into the relationships, commitments, and into a coordinated action. One creates the conditions for cooperation. The other transforms those conditions into collective capacity. Viewed from this perspective, awareness building and coalition building address a different challenge than what we solve through the battle mentality. Rather than directing attention towards differences people disagree on, they direct attention towards areas of alignment. Rather than asking what separates people, they explore what enables them to move forward together. Perhaps this is one of the biggest challenges our dance community faces today, because many high-profile dancers have spent decades refining mechanisms that encourage distinction, independent thinking, critical examination, and the continual refinement of individual approaches. The next stage of development may require equal attention to the mechanisms that encourage understanding, alignment, and cooperation. This shift becomes particularly relevant when moving beyond the level of the individual. Every form of collective organization requires capacities that extend beyond personal development. Trust, coordination, shared responsibility, and the ability to contribute to objectives larger than one's own become increasingly important. Good. So let's talk about practical solutions. So within hip-hop dance culture, the crew has historically served as one of the first environments in which these just talked about capacities could develop. Positioned between the individual dancer and larger organizational structures, crews provided a framework through which cooperation could emerge without sacrificing individuality. We must also notice, over the past 2 decades, solo competitions have increasingly gone up, while the role of crews have drastically diminished. Mostly practical considerations have contributed to that poor development here. Crew battles require larger budgets, more complex logistics, additional travel arrangement, and much greater organizational effort than any solo competition. For many organizers, individual formats just become the more manageable option, even though the significance of crews extends beyond competitive formats. A crew functions by far as more than a collection of dancers. It provides an environment in which knowledge circulates. Ideas are tested, responsibilities are shared, and younger members learn from more experienced members. Crews offer support during setbacks, constructive criticism during periods of stagnation, encouragement during periods of growth, and a crew creates continuity extending beyond the career of any single individual. Crews also provide something that individual development cannot easily replace: collective problem solving. Different members bring different strengths. experiences, perspectives, and networks. Weaknesses that remain invisible to one individual often become visible to your crew. Challenges that exceed the capacity of one person can often be addressed collectively. The result of that is a form of resilience that becomes difficult to achieve alone. Beyond this, crews can generate forms of potential that just don't exist at the level of the individual. When members contribute toward a shared objective, their combined efforts often produce outcomes that exceed the sum of their individual contributions. Knowledge compounds through continuous exchange. Responsibilities can be distributed according to individual strength. Opportunities can be created collectively, and ideas can be refined through ongoing interaction. Over time, this compounding effect expands what the group is capable of achieving. In this sense, the strength of a crew lies not in its members, but also in the relationship between them. Here we can certainly see how the whole becomes more capable than its individual parts. For this reason, crews represent more than just a social grouping. They constitute one of the foundational organizational structures within hip-hop, period. They provide an important bridge between individual participation and larger forms of collective organization. Understanding their role therefore helps illuminate a broader question: how cultures develop the capacity to move from individual excellence toward collective action. This progression rarely occurs in a single step. Before cultures develop federations, representative bodies, or other large-scale institutions, they typically pass through intermediate forms of organization. Individuals form crews. Crews establish projects. Projects then evolve into associations, NGOs, educational initiatives, event platforms, or other organizational structures that pursue objectives extending beyond the interest of a single group. Each stage requires a broader circle of cooperation. The transition from the individual to the crew introduces shared responsibility. The transition from the crew to an organization introduces long-term planning, resource management, and the coordination of larger groups of people. As structures grow, so too does the need for awareness building, trust building, and the ability to align people around common objectives. In this sense, organizations represent an extension of the same principle already present within crews. They allow cooperation to occur at a larger scale. They preserve knowledge, coordinate activities, create opportunities, and pursue objectives that extend beyond the capabilities of any single individual or crew. Then, associations, NGOs, and other forms of rule-based organization can emerge, because functions that were previously carried informally by crews become formalized and scaled. Activities like knowledge transfer, event organization, mentoring, representation, fundraising, archiving, or project development increasingly require structures that extend beyond the capacity of a single group. What begins as cooperation among a handful of individuals gradually develops into more durable forms of organization. As cooperation scales, so does potential. Honestly, look at crews like Body Carnival, The Ruggeds, Vagabonds, Radical Force, Top 9, Predators, Primal Instinct, SDP, just to mention a few. They serve as great examples. They are not just crews, but organizations. Crews allow individuals to combine their efforts and address challenges that exceed the capacity of a single person. Organizations allow multiple crews, projects, and initiatives to coordinate their efforts over long periods of time and a larger scale. Knowledge, experience, networks, and resources can accumulate, compound, and remain accessible beyond the lifespan of any single project or generation. In many respects, each new level of organization emerges when the previous level encounters challenges that exceed its capacity. Individuals form crews, crews establish projects, projects evolve into organizations. Each step represents an attempt to scale cooperation in order to address increasingly complex challenges and pursue increasingly ambitious objectives. This naturally raises another question. What happens when multiple organizations, crews, and initiatives begin pursuing similar objectives? Isn't that what a community is about? At that point, the challenge shifts once again from scaling cooperation within organizations to coordinating cooperation between organizations. And this is where federations enter the conversation. I believe that as long as our attention remains focused primarily on individual development, the culture will struggle to realize its collective potential. I also need to mention here that the rise of social media has amplified many of the same dynamics that already existed within what I call the battle mentality. Visibility, personal branding, individual achievements, and distinction. Sure, these qualities can create remarkable individual success, but they provide only a limited foundation for collective development. A culture or community cannot rely indefinitely on individual excellence alone. It is impossible. It also requires mechanisms that create shared understanding, strengthen relationships, and align people around common objectives. And this is where awareness building and coalition building becomes really important. The more clearly we understand the many elements that connect us, our history, our values, our practices, our knowledge systems, our educational traditions, our events, our music, and our shared responsibility for future generations, the greater our capacity to work together becomes. Again, the challenge is not to abandon individuality. Absolutely not. The challenge is to complement it with equally strong capacities for cooperation. If that works out, our dance culture will be better positioned to represent the full spectrum of its culture. Multiple generations, diverse perspectives, different artistic approaches, and the many roles that contribute to its continued development. In doing so, the culture may discover that its greatest potential lies not only in the excellence of its individuals, but also in its capacity to act collectively while remaining pluralistic. So my hope for the future of our dance culture, but also for our society at large, actually, is that we come to understand that a continual emphasis on individual advancement, while valuable, cannot be itself generate the cohesion required for long-term cultural development. Collective progress depends upon the ability to align around shared objectives and act upon them together. Have a nice day. That's it from me, Storm.